Are you sure you're in the right room, kid? The sheriff barely looked up when Diego Herrera entered with his wrists still handcuffed. Shoulders straight, face impassive. Room didn't fall silent immediately, but something changed. It was the kind of shift you feel in your chest, more other than listening. You could notice that people were already watching him, as if the verdict it was written on his skin. He didn't move nervously, he didn't look around. He simply walked slowly down the hallway, his sneakers making soft sounds on the tile as if each step was measured second row to the left. Someone whispered, "That must have the news guy." "Yes," said another person. "He looks over 17 years old, and just like that." He was already guilty in the courtroom. The judge wasn't even seated, yet but Officer Brett Harrison was sitting upright at the witness stand, flipping through a yellow pad, as if he had nothing to hide and nothing to fear. He looked up once, just once, time towards Diego, then returned directly to his notes, as if this were easy. Diego arrived at the defense table. The officer who accompanied him didn't remove the handcuffs yet. He just gestured for him to sit down. To sit down. He didn't argue. He didn't speak. He sat down. Straight back, eyes forward. He didn't look angry. He didn't look scared, but there was something about him, as if he had already seen the inside of rooms like this too many times for someone his age. Rachel Adams, his public defender, was skimming through files beside him, trying to act as if the tension wasn't thick enough to cut it. She leaned slightly and said softly, "I know this is a lot. I'll do everything I can for Diego." He didn't respond. He just nodded once, not out of rudeness but out of concentration. The people kept turning in their seats. The court staff checked their watches. Some reporters in the back they took out small notebooks, ready for the next story of a troubled teenager. But Diego wasn't playing his role. He wasn't hunched over. He wasn't tapping his foot. He was just sitting there, as if he belonged to a place where most people expected never to end. When the judge finally entered, Diego didn't even blink. He didn't move. He just breathed slowly and steadily, knowing, before a word was said, that this courtroom was not built for boys like him to win. Clerk announced the case and Judge Randall Stone settled into his seat like a man who had already made his decision, adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and without even looking at Diego Nate Edwards, the prosecution. Officer Harrison stood up slowly, confidently, comfortably. He didn't bring papers. He didn't need them. He spoke like someone giving a report on the calm, controlled, and predictable weather. On March 17th began approximately at 3:45 p.m. I responded to a call near Lincoln and Foster upon arrival. I observed the accused, Mr. Herrera, yelling at an elderly person and behaving aggressively. I tried to intervene. He resisted and became verbally combative. I had to restrain him for the safety of everyone. Rachel Adams raised an eyebrow, but remained silent for now. Did not cooperate. Continued Harrison, still firm, escalated the situation, followed the procedure, was detained without injury, didn't move, didn't react, but his fingers tightened slightly on the edge of the table. Rachel noticed, looked from Harrison to Diego, then back to the judge. Barely lifted his gaze. He has a written statement to present. Officer Harrison. It's not necessary, Your Honor. My report, ... It's single quotes in the file. Rachel finally stood up. Your Honor, with respect, I would like to ask the witness a few questions. Stone waved his hand without much interest. Proceed. She walked towards Harrison. Without hurrying, without dragging his feet, the officer says my client was yelling at an elderly person. Do you have any video evidence of that interaction? There were no cameras operating in the immediate area. Any witnesses? Just me. Rachel nodded slowly, and there is no report of injuries. No weapon was found on my client. There is no weapon, but his behavior was clearly threatening to you, to the general public. Harrison responded expressionlessly. Rachel stepped back. Then have to believe only you. Harrison shrugged slightly. I was the officer who responded. Judge Stone tapped his pen once. That will be all. Sufficient for now. The officer's testimony will be entered into the record. Turned his head slightly towards the judge. Then, is that all? His voice was composed. He says something, and it is the truth. The judge narrowed his eyes. "I will speak when you are spoken to." Mr. Herrera. Rachel leaned in, whispering quickly, "Diego, don't do it." But Diego didn't raise his voice. He just said, "I'm not trying to ... fight. I'm just wondering when someone plans to ask what really happened." The courtroom tensed. Even Harrison seemed bewildered for half a second. But then he did what men like him always do when they feel expedite, walked forward one step, then two, and in front of everyone with the judge still observing, he struck Diego in the face with a hard slap without warning. Nobody moved. Diego sat there with his jaw clenched, blood at the corner of his mouth. Looking at Harrison firmly, "You just proved my point," he said softly, gasped, echoing around the room. A woman in the gallery clutched her chest. One of the jurors leaned forward, eyes wide open, but no one stood up, neither the bailiff, nor the judge, nor the other officers in the room. It was as if the slap had frozen time. trapping Gavrian in their place. Diego did not flinch, did not scream, slowly raised his hand, wiped the blood from the corner of his lip and looked directly into Harrison's eyes. You just proved my point, the firm voice repeated. You didn't need to hit me, Butu did it, right here in front of the judge. And no one stopped you. Your words weren't strong, but cut through the silence like a knife. Harrison blinked for Asik. The confidence shattered. He turned around and walked back to the witness stand, witnesses clearing their throats as if nothing had happened. Judge Stone shifted in his chair. Let's take a 5-minute recess, he said quickly, banging the gavel. We will reconvene shortly. Rachel leaned towards Diego, her voice low and hurried. Are you okay? He nodded once, then he looked her in the eyes. It's not the first time, but it should be the last. She was about to speak again but she stopped something in the way he said it. The calmness, the certainty made her stop. The courtroom slowly emptied, the jurors left in silence. Some spectators whispered as they headed towards the doors. A man shook his head murmuring, that boy didn't even move. Another one whispered, that policeman hit him, as if nothing. Diego sat there cleaning his face again with the back of his hand. The blood had stopped, but the red mark remained. Rachel knelt beside him, carefully not to invade his space. What you said was not only brave, it was smart. You didn't give them what they wanted. They wanted me to break, said Diego calmly, but they can't decide who I am. Rachel studied him for a moment. He was just calm. He had control, and that scared her more than anything Harrison had done, because that children didn't become so calm unless they had gone through too much. Diego said gently, I'm going to fight for you, but I need to know, are you hiding something? Something he should know. He looked at her, his eyes sharper than before. I'm nothing, I'm just waiting. Then he leaned back in his chair, as I have had all the time in the world. Rachel stayed crouched next to Diego for a few more seconds, studying his face. He looked young, yes, but his eyes told Ano their story, not just of pain, but of patience, as if he were used to weddingus. If he had learned long ago that speaking too soon could cost more than staying silent. I know this isn't your first time in a room like this, she said gently, but it's the first time I'm sitting next to you. If there's something I should know, now is the time. Diego didn't respond. Immediately, his gaze turned towards the courtroom door, where the last jurors had just exited. Then he looked down at his still handcuffed hands resting in his lap. They don't see names here, he said softly, they see case numbers, skin tones, attitudes. It doesn't matter with that you say, just how they see you. Reichel nodded, trying to absorb every word. Dot had defended many children before, some angry, some terrified, but Diego didn't fit into either. He was prepared, not in a rehearsed way, but like someone who had already accepted the worst and was waiting to see if Summonea realized. It was then that he noticed the chain. It was not striking, barely visible, just the edge of a thin silver chain peeking out from beneath her neck. Ass moved in her seat, catching the light for just a second. Rachel leaned in a little, not wanting to seem nosy. That chain, can I ask what it is? Diego looked at her, expression still unreadable. He slowly pulled it out enough for her to see the small attached metal plate. It wasn't Julie was engraved. She squinted her eyes. 3 words: Herrera, Campos, FBI. Rachel froze, her breath caught. It was subtle, not something you would notice unless you were looking for it. But now that she had done it, everything changed. You started, but Diego tucked the chain back under his shirt and looked away. Other side, don't say it yet. Rachel sat back. Thoughts racing. A federal family badge, just for family. That kind of label. It didn't come from a store. It came from inside the office. He didn't push him. He just nodded slightly. It's okay, he whispered. The doorsiff, the court had not even fully closed when 2 uniformed officers returned from the hallway. They were not in a hurry, but their presence sent a chill through the room. One of them, taller and heavier approach, headed directly to Diego's table. The other followed with a clipboard in hand, scanning the room as if he already knew what he was looking for. The court is in recess, said Rachel, standing up quickly. Why are you here? Protocol, responded the tallest without expression. Random search. We need to search all belongings for contraband or potential threats in the middle of a courtroom, asked his voice, raising her voice. My client is not being arrested for anything related to possession, and they have a warrant. We don't need it, said the second officer, without even looking at her court property. We are allowed to conduct security checks. Before Rachel could respond, they were already opening Diego's backpack, dumping the contents onto the table. Defense carelessly. The books hit the wood with a dull thud. A pencil, cassia pencil, rolled off the edge. One of them tore a sandwich wrapped in aluminum foil and tossed it aside. Like trash, loose papers floated to the ground. Diego didn't move, he just watched, silently concentrated, his face unreadable. Rachel tried again. This is pure harassment. Pure and simple. If you don't stop, I'm going to file a formal complaint. You can file whatever you want, he said high, scribbling on the clipboard. Then that word fell heavy. Then it was always later when it came to kids like Diego. Later they would review their courting, then they would listen to the complaint. Then they would explain why nothing ever ended as quickly as it began. The officers found nothing. Becos there was nothing to find, but still one of them tore off the top page of his clipboard and slammed eaten the table filed under suspicious behavior, he murmured. It will be attached to the report. Then they left as if they hadn't done anything at all. Rachel looked at the paper. It wasn't even signed. Just another vague note that could be twisted into anything the prosecution wanted. Diego leaned forwardsly, gathering his things. He didn't hurry. He placed each item back in his backpack, one by one, as if he had done it before, as if this were routine, and maybe it was when he closed each. Rachel whispered, "Are you okay?" Diego looked at her, then at the paper on the table. "This is what they do before telling the story their way," he said calmly. "So I make sure to remember it real." When the court reconvened, the tension was heavier than before. The people shifted in their seats, whispering softly, looking at Diego as if he were still the center of something they didn't understand completely. Rachel stood a little taller now, her jaw set firm. She was no longer just was defending a case, she was defending the truth. "Your Honor," said walking to the front of the courtroom, "I would like to present new evidence." Judge Stone barely looked up. "Proceed." Rachel handed a small USB drive to the clerk. "This is video from a security camera owned by a civilian located at the corner of Lincoln and Foster, the site of the incident described by Officer Harrison." The secretary connected it, and the screen behind the judge flickered to life. The video was not perfect, grainy and a bit shaky, but the shapes and voices were clear enough. You could see Harrison, and you could see Diego, but he wasn't shouting, he wasn't threatening. Nobody was standing between Harrison and an elderly woman holding a cane. She looked confused and scared. Harrison pushed her shoulder roughly, and she stumbled. Diego intervened, not to attack, but to protect her, arms extended, calm and firm. The court remained still. Rachel turned towards the judge. "This contradicts Officer Harrison's sworn testimony. My client did not escalate the situation. He prevented it from getting worse." There was a pause for a moment. Even Harrison looked unsure. But Judge Stone leaned back with arms crossed and said expressionlessly, "The footage is unverified and lacks a chain of custody. It cannot be entered as official evidence." Rachel blinked, stunned. "Your Honor," he interrupted her, dismissing it as if it were a minor detail. A silent gasp moved through the room. The hope had been there for a second, and then just like that, it was gone, buried under bureaucratic procedures. Diego didn't say a word. He just leaned back, eyes down, letting the silence speak louder than anything he could have shouted. Rachel didn't sit down immediately. She froze for a moment, looking at the judge, as if maybe, just maybe, he would change his mind. But Judge Stone was already scribbling something in a legal blog. Eyes down, completely unperturbed, turned to Diego, his voice low. "I'm sorry." Diego shook his head. "Don't. You are. I told you they would never hear that." But the truth was shown. "I know that's why they buried her." She lay back again, resting her handcuffed hands on her lap, as if she had all the time in the world. Off the world. Rachel sat down slowly, but her eyes did not leave him. "I could feel something building up. Not panic, not anger, something else. Something planned." It was then that he slid a small folded piece of paper towards her without words, without eye contact, just assulant gesture. Rachel hesitated, then opened it under the table. It said 2 words, written in a clear and neat handwriting. "Look, observe." She looked at him, confused, but Diego just tilted his head slightly, as if he knew she would ask, and was telling her not to. Then with a silent movement, he adjusted the sleeve of his shirt. Rachel's eyes caught it immediately. A simple black digital watch with a brushed metal clasps. Simple, unassuming, but not ordinary. I had seen one just like it on CN, the wrist of a federal agent at a classified evidence hearing. One touch could mark a timestamp. 2 taps could transmit secure data. Her breath caught. He didn't look at her. He blushed. He just put his hands back in his lap, as if he hadn't just revealed something massive. From the back row of the courtroom, a man sat up straighter. He had been there the whole time, silent and honest, wearing a charcoal gray suit, a white shirt without a tie, hair well groomed, a calmness about him that didn't draw attention until Noah's eyes were fixed on Diego, observing, waiting. Rachel looked at him, then back at Diego. "It's that one. Just look," said Diego. Calmly. The man in the back row didn't move. He didn't need to. He was exactly where he intended to be. Judge Stone called for another short recess, dismissing the court for 10 minutes. People began to stand up, stretching and murmuring, but the man in the charcoal gray suit remained seated, his eyes never leaving Diego, and Diego never turned around because he didn't have to. Rachel leaned in close, whispering, "Diego, who is that?" This time, Diego did smile just a little. "My father." She blinked, dazed. "At the badge. The chain?" He nodded. "Once it's not for show, it's real." Then he looked ahead again, calm and steady, as if everything was finally moving according to plan. When the judge returned and called the court back to order, the room was still vibrating with the tension that no one could fully name. Officer Harrison stood up again, this time with a bit more arrogance in his step. He handed a folded report to the secretary. "Your Honor," said softly, "I would like to add resisting arrest and obstruction of official records. The accused became uncooperative during transport. Is all documented." Judge Stone didn't even look at Diego, clicked his pen, nodded, and said, "Charges noted and added to the record." File. Rachel stood up so quickly that her chair slid back. Your Honor, this is absurd. There was no obstruction report until just now. This is retaliation. There was no obstruction report until just now. This is retaliation. Judge Stone ignored her, moving on. And it was then that a softer scratch echoed from the back of the courtroom. A chair moved slowly, deliberately. The man in the charcoal gray suit stood up for the first time. Diego turned to look, not hurried, not dramatic, just a silent acknowledgement. Man walked forward, calm and steady. His steps clear on the Tillith room, turned with him, as if drawn by gravity. Harrison's shoulders tensed when the man arrived at the front, just behind the railing. He spoke in a low voice that made everyone lean in to strong words. Measures. Harrison blinked. Who are you? The man reached into his jacket, took out a black leather case, and opened it with a silent snap. Samuel Herrera, Deputy Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Silence. Real silence. The kind that feels like the air has been sucked out of the room. Rachel's mouth opened slightly. Judge Stone froze. Samuel didn't raise his voice. He didn't look angry. He looked confident. I am formally requesting a special evidentiary hearing, he said. Eyes fixed on the judge. Stone swallowed. Under what grounds? Samuel breathed. Under grounds of judicial prejudice, falsified testimony, and obstruction of due process by his officer. And with that, he opened a folder that he had been holding. Inside contained printed pages, time-stamped security video, records authentic by agents, and 3 previous complaints filed against Officer Harrison. Handed them to the secretary, who looked overwhelmed, just holding them. I suggest you read each page, said Samuel, because from this point onward, everything you do will be part of the record. The court remained still, as if the very walls were holding their breath. The secretary handed over the documents to Judge Stone, whose hands trembled slightly as he leafed through the first. Pagesh's eyes stopped at a familiar name. His own signature from a case dismissed 2 years ago. Then, another thing, a third, all connected to Officer Harrison, all buried. Rachel glanced sideways at Samuel, then at Diego. Did you have all this planned? Samuel didn't respond. He didn't need to. Judge Stone cleared his throat. Deputy Director Herrera, this court was not informed. Samuel raised a hand calmly. This court never had the intention of being informed until now. He turned towards Harrison, who looked pale now, sweating, still standing, but barely maintaining that confident posture. Samuel, continue. Eddie's internal records document a pattern of excessive force, racial profiling, and police reports falsified. 3 separate incidents swept under this same roof. Secretary looked up abruptly. Some jurors in the gallery were now openly staring, eyebrows. The press row came to life with scribbles and camera flashes. Judge Stone searched for his gavel, but before he could speak, Samuel raised his voice loud enough to be heard. And by order of federal authority, he clearly stated, Officer Brett Harrison is arrested for obstruction of justice, abuse of power, and falsification of official records. Doors opened silently to federal agents entered suits. Faces walked down the hallway like shadows pulled by purpose. Harris's mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked at the judge, who couldn't meet his eyes, then at Secretary, then to Rachel, but there was no one left to save him. The agents caught up with him. One read his rights in a flat and clear voice. The other took out the handcuffs. They clicked into place like the end of a chapter. The phones were raised around the room, silently at first, then all at once clicks. Flashes, videos, recordings spread like wildfire. A once silent courtroom, no filled with the sound of evidence. Diego did not move, did not smile, he just sat there, hands folded, eyes forward, as if would have known all along that this moment was coming. In the gallery, someone whispered, that's his. Another said, no, that's justice. Rachel leaned towards Diego, her voice barely a whisper. Did you plan this from the beginning, right? Diego blinked once. He didn't say just, I waited for the part. They never expect a truth that cannot be buried. The news reached the internet before the courtroom emptied. A shaky video from the officer's phone of Officer Harrison being taken away in handcuffs was already trending with hashtags justice for Diego. The silence speaks truth about power. Be the time Diego and his father left the courthouse. The cameras were everywhere. The reporters were shouting questions, microphones pushed forward, phones raised, flash after flash. A crowd had gathered not only to see, but to bear witness. Diego did not hurry. He walked alongside his father, calm, measured. Just as he had walked to that courtroom now, however, the world saw him different. Not as a suspect, not as a story to be rewritten, but a Sumion who had weathered a storm without making a scene. A young reporter stepped forward. Diego shouted at her. Why didn't you speak up earlier? He paused for just a few seconds to let the noise fall around him like dust. Then he looked at her and simply said, because when justice speaks for you, you don't have to shout. The crowd fell silent for a moment, and then the applause began. Not wild, not rehearsed, just real. A few hands thon more, a slow growth of sound, like respect building up from the ground. Samuel looked at his son, not as the deputy director of the FI, but as a father who had lost too much, leaned slightly and said, I wasn't there for the blows, but I'm here for the healing. There for the blows, but I'm here for the healing. Diego didn't respond. He didn't need to. He just nodded once, as they walked forward, not towards a press conference, not towards something deeper, a change, a reminder, that the truth, even when silenced, never disappears, and sometimes leaves a courtroom with their head held high in the background. Someone held a sign made of notebook. Paper did not raise his voice but raised the level, and maybe that was enough. Diego did not become a symbol because he shouted. He became one because he stood tall when everything around him tried to push him down in a world that often demands noise to prove value. Reminded us that character right is not measured by volume, it is measured by conviction. His silence was not weakness, it was strength waiting for his moment, and when that moment came, he didn't roar. He reasoned it. Weeks later, classes resumed. Diego returned, not with cameras following him but with classmates who now saw him differently, not just as a boy who had been accused, but as a young man who represented something greater. Justice did not give him a crown, it gave him Rotterdam's name, and in that, there is a lesson for all of you who don't always have to fight hard. Sometimes you just have to stand tall long enough for the truth to catch up with your itch. If this story moved you even a little, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel, because here we share stories that matter. Stories that reflect courage, integrity, and the quiet strength that changes the world, one truth at a time. Not miss the next M.